Will I get an indicate? Hey everyone, welcome. We are covering Sean Diddy Combs' trial today. I'm sure you've seen it. It's all over the internet. He's been found guilty on 2 federal counts. You might recall he was accused of several counts. He was convicted of violating the Mann Act, which involves transporting women across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. He was acquitted on the more serious charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. The trial lasted over 7 weeks. In the Southern District of New York, there was some explosive testimony by Cassie Ventura. A lot of anonymous accusers, former bodyguards, FBI agents presented digital evidence, encrypted messages. There was a lot of shocking testimony that came out and really showed the dark underside of, I guess we can call it Hollywood, or at least the underground rap industry. Sentencing is scheduled for September 19th. He faces up to 20 years in prison. Most analysts think he's going to get about 8 to 12 years, depending on how they stack the convictions. But he's still facing dozens of civil lawsuits from various people, and a lot of big name people have been named in the course of the trial. So with that, I'll welcome my panel, throw it over to you guys. Welcome everybody, Megan, JB. Megan, I'll go to you first. You've been covering trials for a long time. What is your first impression seeing this conviction today? Were you surprised, disappointed? What's your thought?
Not surprised, but one thing, the prosecutors did file their opposition to bail today that has their sentencing guideline calculation for the 2 charges he was convicted on, and it's 51 to 63 months, and that's with some enhancements that I think the defense is going to be able to argue against. So obviously that's pretty low. It's between 4 years 3 months and 5 years 3 months. But that's
how did they arrive at that? How did they arrive at that, considering the sentencing guidelines and all of the other factors?
Well, the U.S. Sentencing Commission guidelines it's a big 100-page, 400-page manual that's online, that if you go into that, you can find the code for what he was convicted of and then read the guidelines and figure out which enhancements they might think apply. And the enhancements are always subjective. The defense is going to argue against it, but you figure out the offense level, and you can find that in the guidelines. And then you figure out his offender level score, which is a little bit tougher for somebody with previous convictions. But the prosecutor said in their calculation today that they're calculating him in the first offender level score. So somebody with no criminal background. And then there's actually a chart in the commission guidelines that you go through, and you find the offender level score and the offense level. And it shows you the mandatory, or not the mandatory, but the range that they face, the minimum guideline versus the maximum guideline. So when you hear the mandatory minimums or the maximums, those are never actually what they're facing. It's always a guideline calculation. And it's very possible for a layman to do that because it's all online, but it's just frankly just takes a lot of work, and it's better. I mean, the prosecutors did their own calculation, and the defense is going to come in and do their own. And like I said, there are some enhancements in there that I don't have it in front of me, but it'll be easy for the defense to argue that those shouldn't apply here and there, so they could get it down even more. But I've done this for other cases, other charges, that kind of thing. Use the sentencing.
Let's take it back up to 30,000 feet for the people who haven't paid attention to anything that's going on, and they just heard about it through the news, and they heard that Diddy's a bad guy and he likes baby oil. So for the people who think Diddy's a bad guy who likes baby oil, JB, I'll ask you, like, if somebody sat down and said, "Hey, what happened today?" What would be the minute answer you would tell them about what the impact of what happened was?
I'd say sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
I'd say he escaped the most serious charges. I mean, this was overall a really big win for him, because the transportation for prostitution charges I always thought that'd be hard to escape a conviction on that, because the prosecutors even emphasized in their closing argument that it's illegal even if everyone enthusiastically consents and participates. And of course, they were arguing that not everyone consented here. But Diddy's argument against try to say that he didn't do that, there was kind of an argument from the defense that, he thought he was paying for these escorts time and not sex. But there were also text messages and communications that showed Diddy blatantly knew he was paying these people to come out and have sex with his girlfriends. The big legal question was he coercing the women into it? And that, if they had found him guilty of sex trafficking, would have brought more criminal implication to the transportation charges. But with them not finding him guilty of trafficking, it's pretty safe to assume that they just convicted him of transportation, because technically he's guilty of that, even if everyone consented. But if they didn't think everyone consented, they would have been more likely to have at least one trafficking conviction. But for him to escape all that is overall a big win for him, and a really big loss for the prosecutors too. I mean, they have to be with just the political current and kind of the scrutiny that the Southern District of New York is under. I doubt the prosecutors on that case are like super excited right now, just relaxed, having a drink. Something like.
Yeah, well, JB, let me throw it over to you. Like, what's your big take into that for what happened today?
I'm actually not shocked. I thought there was a chance at one of the trafficking charges going in there, but then in a time where, Harvey Weinstein was able to appeal successfully, I thought maybe he would get an appeal on that. Like she said, it would be really hard to escape the charges of transportation and prostitution. They were pretty open in the text messages. But despite the headlines, there was a lot of contrarian evidence on Cassie's involvement, aka enthusiasm, as she said. And really, what I thought had a chance early on, but during the trial started to go away, were maybe these racketeering charges, because early on they brought in this charge that he was bringing in drugs, bringing in guns, and selling them. And they had arrested his drug dealer. And that person also testified. It didn't seem like they had the real forensic evidence to prove that. And when you look at the people that they brought on, like you said, a lot of them were anonymous. But where was the evidence of these things happening for a decade, 2 decades? I mean, when you go into this guy's actual past, I mean, I think there have been credible accusations. Tupac himself accused him of the attempted murder the first time around. You had the Shine incident with Jennifer Lopez, where he escaped those vast gun charges and he went to prison for a very long time. And then in this trial, which I think was probably the most pervasive or persuasive out there, was the Kid Cudi conversation. Ventura having an affair with this person. He's pretty prominent, and then all of a sudden his car explodes. Mm-hmm. It's actually pretty sad to me that the prosecution and the police were unable to present any type of real evidence that, again, was persuasive enough to bring a jury into that. Now, I would also say they were in New York. He's beaten charges there before. You also have a very liberal sense of kind of this prostitution angle. So at the end of the day, I'm not a big fan of Dershowitz. Dershowitz said he was going to get off on most of these things. And as I followed the evidence and this trial, it really seemed that way. And now we have this. And as she said, I would be shocked. I maybe as a stun value, like 5 to 8 years, but like I'm thinking maybe 2 to 4, where I'm not sure how much time he's actually served, but they're going to take that off. And we could see this guy on the streets literally within the next 12 to 18 months. That's a real possibility.
Let's talk about, if we can, real quick. I want to go into what he was charged with, and I want to talk about the big picture a little bit. And I do want to get into the time he's going to serve and compare that to other sentences for other people. And I think a lot of people are going to be shocked when sentencing happens in September. But look, let's talk about the racketeering. So in order to have racketeering conspiracy, he was alleged to be the leader of an enterprise engaging in sex trafficking, drug distribution, witness intimidation, and financial crimes. In order for the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, he was alleged to have facilitated the trafficking of women across state lines using psychological and physical coercion. Regarding the transportation to engage in prostitution, which was what he was convicted on under the Mann Act, he was alleged to have knowingly transported women across state lines for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts. And finally, he was charged with conspiracy to commit witness tampering, I believe. I'm not sure what happened with that. But at the end of all of this, I think, regardless of the charge and regardless of the sentencing, I think the thing that people are most shocked about is to hear about what went on during these, what are you going to call them, the freak parties, the freak offs, or whatever they are, who was there, how it was covered up, how long they would get away with it. You talked about, Jason, before the show, we were talking about Epstein and all the things, and everybody was so upset about everything that they learned about who was at Epstein Island, how they covered it up, the people who went missing, and all these things. But look, here's what Cassie, his long-term girlfriend, said about what she saw. She said she saw that Diddy would give her powder or pills before these freak offs. That were like basically sex parties with other women. She tracked her location, physically assaulted her, threatened her with a gun when she tried to leave his house. She said that he flew her to from Las Vegas to Miami for business trips that were actually a cover for sex arranged with other men in exchange for favors, drugs, and silence. I mean, when you hear the way, and bodyguards have come forward and said, "Yeah, I've heard these things and it was disgusting." But how many high-profile celebrities from J Lo and possibly Jay Z and all these folks who knew about these things? And there were Cuban Gooding, I believe Cuban Gooding Jr. was one of these folks who was in some of these civil lawsuits has been named. We're talking about some of the upper echelon of Hollywood or entertainment or whatever music that knew this was going on, covered up for it, pretended it was basically okay. All this came out in the trial, regardless of what Diddy ends up doing as far as time is concerned or what these convictions show. What does this say? Because for so long you heard this was just a conspiracy theory. These things happening in Hollywood, they didn't really happen, but they are, and they're being covered up. Megan.
I would say I'm not sure that really came out in trial. Like nothing about Cuba Gooding Jr. His co-conspirators were identified as his security and then his chief of staff, Christina Coram. But we really didn't hear about other celebrities like participating in this at all. And granted, we didn't see. I mean, the videos aren't available to the public, but if you go through the transcripts of when they were played and entered as evidence, they identify who's in there, the escorts and that kind of thing. And we really didn't hear about, we did hear about a lot of other celebrity names, just kind of here and there. Young Miami, the woman that he was dating at the same time as Jane and the jealousy that she had. But we really did not hear anything at all about other celebrities, like knowing about this, condoning about this, helping him with this. It was all his employees, the people from Bad Boy Entertainment, like his personal assistants, although his personal assistants weren't identified as co-conspirators in the racketeering conspiracy. It was his security and chief of staff that they identified as co-conspirators in the closing argument. But that was the biggest problem for the racketeering charge, was you need co-conspirators for that, and you need to have entered into an agreement. And that's not like a contract, but it is, you have to have somebody else who knows that they're committing crimes on your behalf, and not just one crime, but it's like an enterprise. Like they know that they're committing crimes on behalf of the enterprise. So that was their biggest problem with the racketeering charge. So I think if they had anything on other celebrities, or if they thought that they could get other celebrities in there to like testify about this, they absolutely would have. I mean, they needed it because their racketeering charge, the actual conspiracy on it does remain to be seen what's going to happen with all those lawsuits, because kind of the assumption was at the time, Diddy's cooked, he's going to get convicted on all counts and go to prison for life, and all these lawsuits will just settle in bankruptcy or whatever. But that's obviously not going to happen now, and he's probably going to be very emboldened to fight these. And a lot of those lawsuits are just a little shaky. I'm hoping that we get to the point in America where people just stop pulling up a complaint right after it was filed and screenshotting the most salacious details and just putting them out to their followers and being like, hey, here's some news. But that is still where we're at with the Diddy lawsuit.
Well, and while that's a fair point, the reality is, I've never looked in anybody on this panel or anybody I really know that closely's civil dockets or criminal investigations. But I can tell you, I've never been named in a lawsuit that alleged anything like violence or inappropriate sexual activity and some of these other things. And in these civil lawsuits that are targeting others that don't necessarily involve Diddy, you have Aaron Hall and Harv Pierre, I believe they were named in suit, alleging witnessing or facilitating abuse. Cuban Gooding Jr., there's a lawsuit that says that he was accused in a complaint by producer Rodney Jones. His son, Justin Combs, like you mentioned, Miami. All these folks have been mentioned and Jay-Z, he was named in a lawsuit alleging rape at an MTV after party in 2000, along with Diddy. So we can sit there for a second, and I'm not arguing with you. I'm just for the sake of discussion, and my panel is changing here. This is fun. For the sake of discussion, Diddy was convicted today of transporting women for prostitution. He wasn't convicted of sex trafficking, although there was evidence of it, just not enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And then we have all these other accusations about some of these people. And like you said, there's security guards and people complaining, saying that, hey, these people were there, they witnessed this stuff. There's enough circumstantial evidence, maybe not to convict, maybe even not to find clear and convincing evidence in a civil case. But there's enough for people to go, wait a second. If this is happening this broadly in this industry, and if it's happening in Hollywood, and it's happening in music, and people are covering it up, you mentioned Epstein too. I mean, these are the things. There's this elite class of people that can seemingly get away with whether it's rape, prostitution, whether it's sex trafficking, drugs, violence, in some cases murder. And we heard so much about during the last couple of years about people being above the law. And so my question is, and I'll ask you, Jason, and I'll go back to you, Megan, is Hollywood entertainment, are they above the law? Does it seem to be applied equally to them?
So I think it's actually beyond Hollywood. First of all, your premise at the very beginning that people didn't really believe that kind of sex was for sale or that people were coerced into sex in Hollywood. I think it's been an open secret and almost accepted in a lot of ways. On the flip side of that, people look at people that are fame hungry and willing to do things, and they say, well, that person was willing to do that. Now, as far as Epstein goes, I think those are wildly different cases only because you had so much video evidence, eyewitness evidence of underage girls with Epstein on top of, all sorts of connections to much richer and wealthier people than any of these Holly weirdos dream to be. I mean, you look at Les Wexner, and that's a verifiable billionaire. On top of that, with this Diddy thing, I would say, again, she pointed out the charges they actually brought. Yeah, the headlines were there and they were salacious, the nipple stuff after the fact of a, male prostitute with his girlfriend. That catches headlines. But really, a lot of the noise was never brought into court. And whether or not there were nefarious things going on with his quote unquote flavor camp, where he did have underage kids around at these parties, that wasn't really discussed in court. You brought up that lawsuit with Jay-Z. That's a 16-year-old girl at the time that supposedly has gone on to notoriety and fame. Without me looking at the rest of that, I don't necessarily doubt it. I mean, we're in an industry where Jay-Z went on tour and did an album with R. Kelly called Best of Both Worlds. And that whole circle knew that he was married to a 15-year-old Aaliyah, that I think they had a relationship from the time they were 14. And her parents at the time, again, signed off on it. So, when we talk about the music industry in particular, here's a very uncomfortable fact. Steven Tyler did a very similar thing when he was a younger man and married a 15-year-old with the signed consent of their parents. So, again, let's look at our court system and what we've done. I'd also point out that, yes, money is a factor. For instance, I don't remember what his last name is, but just this week, the person from the Tampa Bay Rays, who was, up to make maybe $100+ million if they let him back in the league, was convicted as a 21-year-old with a 14-year-old girl, and he got time served. Okay. So unfortunately, until the laws change and until the culture changes, I don't know that we're actually going to get the kind of justice we want, because people can be bought off. Again, when you look at this guy's record over the last 25 years, and not just the innuendo, the cumulative evidence, like I discussed, the Tupac stuff, the Shine stuff, the human trafficking stuff, that he wasn't convicted of but has been charged with, the Kid Cudi accusations. It's not of a very nice person, but as we know, blackmail rules the world. And a lot of people making that association with Epstein. I think Epstein, although he used that, had bosses. I'm not so sure that unless Diddy was compromised occasionally, he had any bosses. I think he had learned the tricks of the trade. I mean, you look at a guy like Hefner. We talk about women for sale. Remember, there was a whole show on entertainment television about Hefner and his 4 wives, many of whom have now spoken out against him and said it's horrible. Well, he was filming a lot of the events there. Who was a frequent person there? Bill Cosby. You can say what you want about Cosby, just like Weinstein. He's not in jail anymore. So I know I went off on a jag there, but overall, who's above the law? Unfortunately, I'd say yes, the Holly weirdos, they have a better shot of getting out of it. But the people above them, the people that were actually with Epstein, they have a way better shot of never even being charged with it.
No, and to be clear, on all the people we're talking about here, and everybody I've mentioned, these are just names that have appeared in civil lawsuits. They haven't been accused of any criminal wrongdoing. They're not standing trial for any criminal wrongdoing, and none of these civil lawsuits necessarily will result in any conclusive evidence that any of these things occurred. It's just when you look at everything as a big picture and you see these names pop up, and it's like, what is going on here? And I don't know if it's a pattern or if it's just luck. Liz, I want to welcome you to the panel. What's your take? Big news today. A lot of people thought
Yeah.
that he was going to be in jail a long time. It seems that he might not be in jail that long, but still, nevertheless, going to jail, guilty of transporting women for the purpose of prostitution, not guilty of any other charges. What's your thoughts today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I got to say, you guys are my spirit animals. I feel that you guys are talking about so many topics that I've been covering that no one in the mainstream media is talking about, including that there's other celebrities involved in these alleged crimes. And we learned that through many of the civil suits, and one of them being from Lil Rod's lawsuit that he filed. And for people that don't know, it was Lil Rod's civil suit that paved the way for the criminal charges to take place. Now, number one,
I think it was Cassie's lawsuit that paved the way. So,
I'm sorry, what?
No,
it was Lil Rod's. That's not true. It was Lil Rod's lawsuit. Her lawsuit, I'm not saying that her lawsuit didn't help, but the main one was Lil Rod's. And so, number one, I had a feeling that we would get multiple guilty charges, but not like all, right? So this is kind of what I expected. I am very happy with what happened today because, as you guys have been discussing, these elite celebrities, people in positions of power, including Diddy, have been able to get away with crimes for decades. And finally, even though this wasn't a huge victory, it was at least some justice. Diddy has been getting away with crimes going back to the 90s, which has been outlined in his lawsuit, where he talks about that infamous nightclub shooting. And you mentioned earlier Shine Barrow, who took the fall for Diddy back then. So I am very happy where we are at because it's a huge step, at least in the right direction. With that being said, I don't think that this is over. I think that Diddy's story is just beginning. Lil Rod mentioned today in another show that I was also part of an interview with, that he has been told, and I've been told this too from multiple sources, that there will be more charges against criminal charges that are laid against Diddy. And so I really don't think that this is going to be the end of the story for Diddy. I do believe that he may receive more charges. And I do think it's very possible that he will be faced with sex trafficking charges for minors.
Megan, I wanted to throw it over to you.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what's going to happen at the bail hearing this afternoon. They're saying that under the Bail Reform Act, this is prosecutors and also Cassie's lawyer, that he's not actually even entitled to any kind of release, that the Bail Reform Act, the federal law regarding bail, mandates incarceration after conviction for transportation of prostitution charges. So that I think just reading on that, and the judge has only been on the bench for like 3 years. This is his first big criminal case. He spent his whole career doing like bankruptcy law for Sussman Godfrey. So if the law does say that, I haven't actually looked at the Bail Reform Act myself. I don't think he's going to get out today, but I do think that we're still looking at not any more than 63 months, like prosecutors said in their filing today, for a sentence for that. So that'll be interesting to see. But I wanted to thank you all so much for having me. I've got to run to another appointment, but it was a great discussion. It was good to meet you guys all too. So thank you so much,
Megan. Appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
So I want to pick up on Liz where you left off, and I'll throw it over to you. Do you go by JB or Jason? Because your thing on the thing says JB.
Jason, I usually only do the JB, so it doesn't take out my lower third.
Yeah, I'm sitting here calling you JB. I'm like, I don't even know if this.
You can call me whatever you want. I'm just happy to be here, brother. Let me say this. I think she's right, by the way, and I don't think you're going to see Diddy get out today. We already kind of discussed that timeline. I'll say this, whether or not more charges come, the damage that has been done to his image right now, I think is irreversible. Right now, Cassie Ventura, I think rightly so, is stating concerns about, repercussions for those that testified against him. I don't think that they would necessarily be immediate, but Diddy's done a very, very good job of, let's just say, avoiding prosecutions in situations that I don't think other people would have. The other thing I would say is, you were talking about high-level celebrity sexual abuse, the Cuba Gooding Jr. thing. That's not, him with a younger person. Like it's a producer that felt like he was, being sexually gone after and, approached. We've had people like Terry Crews talk about that in Hollywood, how he basically has been demanded sexual favors and refused them. And look at a guy like Spacey. Spacey is on the comeback tour right now. He's doing podcasts. Tucker Carlson's having him on. Yeah, he's won in court. But does that mean that he's not guilty? I don't know about that. I don't know that he's going to be able to make that comeback either. I think a lot of people are sour on it. But even today, David, again, with that high level sexual accusation, when you look at the Conor McGregor trial in Dublin, Ireland, that woman who barely got any money wanted criminal charges, and all the evidence showed that she was violently beaten and raped. And they found him, guilty of that, not criminal charges. By the way, David, a lot of people don't know this. Right now, he's not in the country, probably for the next 5 or so months, because he's avoiding being served on his Miami sexual assault case. He had jumped ship. Traditionally, they give you 30 days to serve. The case had been filed. They knew he was out. So now the judge extended that another 180 days. Just 2 weeks ago, he's knocking guys out in a nightclub on camera. These are the type of people that we're talking about. They think they can get away with anything because, David, unfortunately, they often do.
Let me ask you, Liz, about that. Look, you've seen what's going on with just the accusations in this one case alone. We talk about all the civil lawsuits with everybody else involved. We talk about, like we just mentioned, Kevin Spacey and all these other people. Is this something that's ever going to stop? Are people just finding out more about it? Do you think is this just so a part and parcel with the industry? And that just it's something that people are going to learn to accept. I just don't understand how we can go from Harvey Weinstein, everyone be like, oh my God, I'm shocked this is happening, to now it's everywhere. And it's almost becoming, okay, that's just the business. I mean, that was the defense's argument, right? In this case, the defense's argument was, that's just an extravagant Hollywood lifestyle that you people are just not exposed to. Nothing abnormal here. You're just not used to it. And then you have people that are in therapy or killing themselves because of the trauma they were exposed to. I mean, what do you think?
Well, the sexual abuse, the sex trafficking, and the satanic ritualistic abuse has actually, unfortunately, been going on for forever. I mean, this has been happening in ancient cultures, like throughout history, all around the world. And there were multiple cases that popped up in the 80s and the 90s where it was exposed that there were rings of elites, including some celebrities, that were involved in the rape, torture, and trafficking of children, but also the satanic ritualistic abuse of children. And back then, the media covered that up and they called it the Satanic Panic. And there were multiple cases. One was the Finders, and the other was the McMartin preschool scandal. And back then, there was a trial. But the reason why the owners of the preschool got off is because, well, one of the reasons why is because they couldn't find the tunnels that the kids said that they were trafficked underneath. Well, it turns out years later, under Trump's first term, the FBI released a record that proved that there were indeed not only just tunnels underneath the McMartin preschool, they also found all these satanic artifacts like pentagrams and things and dead animal bones too, because the children said that they were forced to kill animals and like cats and dogs, or that the abusers did in these satanic rituals. And unfortunately, a lot of people in positions of power, including those in Hollywood, really worship Satan. That's a real thing. That's why when you go on these people's Instagram pages or you watch their music videos or whatever, you will see them constantly flashing satanic symbolism. They'll be flaunting it on their social media. They'll be, they do music videos where they openly talk and brag about worshiping Satan, Lucifer, Baal. Jay-Z will rap about it. And the worship of Satan goes hand in hand with sexual ritual abuse. These Satanists and, these people believe in Satan. Okay. So this is not what maybe you believe, but this is what they believe, right? These Satanists believe that they get power from these rituals. And that's why they do these rituals. And we learn that there's a lot of people in DC that are also involved in these satanic rituals. We actually learned that in 2016 when WikiLeaks released the Podesta emails. In the Podesta emails, we learned that they were involved in spirit cooking dinners. These dinners involve mixing blood, sperm, urine with breast milk and like cutting your fingers, and all this crazy stuff. Well, who's Marina Abramovic friends with? Jay-Z, Lady Gaga, and a ton of other people in Hollywood. So it's been going on forever. It's real. These people worship Satan, and the satanic ritualistic abuse often involves sex rituals, including satanic ritualistic abuse on children.
Now, Liz, people hearing this, right? And I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to ask you a follow-up and then get Jason's take on this, or I'm calling him JB now. That's my new name for you. Because you're saying things that if somebody hasn't paid attention to this, they'll be like, oh, that kind of sounds a little, and I'm not judging you. I'm not saying you sound crazy. But there'll be people watching going, okay, that sounds a little bit crazy. Okay, they're Satanists now. They're not just
not some of them. I'm not saying all of them are.
No, I know. I'm not asking you to defend yourself. What I'm suggesting is, but at the same time, we have seen weird symbolism. And I don't know if it's Hollywood mocking people because of the accusation, or if there's any tie there. Look, you hear about Pizzagate, and then for the viewers that don't know about Pizzagate, Google it. I'm not going to get into it now. But there's all these different conspiracies that are, whether they be satanic or some other thing, that a lot of people believe, at least on the, in the conspiracy world, believe that these things are true. And people are hearing you say this, and they're like, okay, well, Diddy's weird, and maybe he's a bad guy, but is he a Satanist? So how do you bridge really criminal behavior and maybe disgusting behavior and an extravagant Hollywood lifestyle that just us regular folks don't quite get with something much deeper like Satanism? And I'll let you answer that, but then I'll throw it over to Jason and get your take.
Yeah. Well, so is Diddy a Satanist or not? Well, does he engage in occult rituals? Well, yeah, he does. Before he went to the verdict of the 1990 nightclub hearing, one of his bodyguards has spoken out and actually was in the documentary about Diddy that I believe was on Hulu. And he said that before he went to court to hear that verdict for that case, they stopped at a park in New York along the way, and he engaged in a ritual where they sacrificed a bird. And then there's been other reports. There was one report that came out a few years ago from Crazy Days and Nights saying that Diddy had a yacht party, somewhere in off the coast of Europe. And at this yacht party, he had one of his workers go get him a live goat, and he sacrificed it in front of his guests. So that's an occult ritual. So he's engaging in occult rituals. So my answer would be, yeah, he probably is a Satanist, because I don't know any Christians that are sacrificing goats or birds.
Jason, let me throw it over to you.
Yeah. So let me just say this. I was aware about the accusation via the bird and the documentary with Diddy. And I know a lot of the things that Liz just said there sounds extremely wild. I will say this. I started as an extreme skeptic on all of those things. I grew up in kind of a Christian environment in the 80s when, the satanic panic was supposedly going on, and hearing about the New World Order and all these bad people. And I thought not only was it over exaggerated, but there was really no evidence behind it. The real Satanists, they were the goth kids in high school that couldn't get laid and just were upset. There was certainly no power structure. I would encourage people to check out this book.
Now you're talking.
Oh, is that what you went and got? Is that what you went and got when I saw you were on stage?
Him. I love him. Marry me. That's awesome.
So I'll just say this. First of all, I distinguish between the occult and pure Satanism because, first of all, most Satanists will tell you at their heart, they're actually atheists and they are mocking Christianity. That's kind of the modern way they talk about it. I would encourage people to go watch the documentary Hail Satan. It's extremely good and it gives you really an insight to who those people are. But then as far as occult practices, she talked about Jay-Z. Jay-Z has kind of been an open acolyte to the practices of someone like Aleister Crowley, wearing the shirts. And Crowley was infamous for his do as thou wilt mentality, basically telling you that you are your own God, which a lot of Satanists that don't believe in anything believe, because it's kind of this self-empowering. A lot of it's honestly, that Tony Robbins self-empowerment kind of stuff. But you're your own God. So in other words, if you don't feel bad for killing a bunch of people and you can get away with it, you do your thing. He also would invoke spirits, Crowley. And in one of those invocations, he actually wrote about the most powerful form of sex magic. And this was actually basically raping a young boy who was a virgin and then cutting their throat at the apex of orgasm. Now, when you read this book, if it was not so heavily sourced, let me just show everybody right here, okay? The book has a bibliography of mainstream articles and reports that is that thick. It's probably close to 100 pages. Nick Bryant, mainstream journalist, from the McMartin trial to the Franklin scandal to Craig Spence, all there. And another accolade of Nick Bryant. He's the guy that actually brought you the Epstein Black Book. So Bryant got that outside of the court system and literally nobody would publish it. Brought it to just about everybody. Gawker published it. The old school kind of, celeb rag. I don't know if you remember it, David. For those that don't know about Gawker, after they published that, they also published the Hogan sex tape. Peter Thiel was so mad that Gawker had outed him as a homosexual because he was closeted at the time. He bankrolled Hogan's lawsuit, which crippled and put them out of business. So Peter Thiel, free speech guy. Just want to point that out as well. So just kind of going back to the occult stuff, I would say this. I have, I think, 9 out of the 11 or 8 out of the 11 annals internally of a thing called the Bohemian Grove Club. Are you aware of that, David?
I'm not aware.
Oh, come on. You've never heard of the Bohemian Grove?
Let me tell you where I hang out.
We're going to take you down the rabbit hole.
I don't go down the rabbit hole very often. This is why I'm interested in this conversation. And listen, a lot of our viewers don't go down this rabbit hole. So there's people that are watching or going, okay, these people sound, and I'm not suggesting I think this, but there are people watching that go, you sound nuts. So explain.
I can go grab those annals too, David. They're right over there. Again,
I'm not suggesting it.
But there's actually a precursor to this by the lawyer that was involved and also a state senator. It's called the Franklin Cover-Up. You can get the PDF file. Now, I read that first, and quite frankly, I almost got sick at one point in that book. Yeah. I was somewhat skeptical of it until I read this, which not only solidified it, but found more victims and documented.
So let me pause real quick and ask you a question then. Sure. Because I've heard some of these things. I haven't heard about the thing you were just talking about, Liz, but I'll learn about it now, obviously. And I'm not suggesting that none of this is. Over the last few years, I've learned that everything that I thought couldn't be possible, I've learned is possible. I mean, I used to think that anybody who said 9/11 that we had something to do with it, I used to think they were crazy. And then I heard from a special operations guy who was in overseas at the time who said, we found the guys like a year before and they told us to not do anything. So when you start to hear things over time, you start to go, okay, well, now what's true and what's not? I still haven't got to the point where I don't think the moon landing is real. I still think that's real, but maybe you guys will convince me otherwise. I still think the earth is round, although I've heard compelling arguments otherwise. But the point I'm getting at is, yeah.
David, I stick to what I can document. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm not, listen, I'm just going to say that's why you haven't seen me make wild accusations of this person is that. I say that there are the reports. People can read the stuff. They can watch the videos. For instance, 9/11. Okay. I have 2 documentaries on it. They are free right now in my playlist. If anybody wants to check it out after this conversation, Loose Change Final Cut and Fabled Enemies. Most people have no idea about that information. You talk about people that are now speculating. I had Rudy Giuliani on my program in October, and I specifically asked him about Building 7 because actually his city corporation counsel, his right-hand man, Michael Hess, was blown up in Building 7 way before it came down with another individual, Barry Jennings, who I interviewed all the way back in 2007. They were rescued that day before the building came down, but they were the only 2 guys in the Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor. Got down to the 8th floor, explosion happens in the building, and then they can't get out till they're rescued by fire. When we were done with the interview, I said to Rudy after that, because Rudy also rightfully knew that the Central Intelligence Agency was in Building 7. And we discussed how they actually had snipers around that area to get the documents there and make sure nobody else did over those times. I said, you don't think they blew that building up? And he specifically said, I don't, because of all that documents. He goes, but if they were going to cover things up, if they wanted to cover it up, I'm open to it. He goes, I'm open to all the conspiracy theories now that what's been done to me.
And that's an excellent point. And that really is where I got started on this, is by saying there's a lot of people who would refuse to believe conspiracy theories. You would just think people were far right, whatever. Like I said, people would say you're crazy. But over the years, we've learned that if you can suspend your disbelief that the United States government colluded with foreign intelligence agencies to produce dossiers in order to get warrantless, wiretaps on a president in the United States. If we can learn that actually happened, I mean, if we can learn that the origins of COVID was covered up, I mean, where can we go? But now taking everything back to Diddy, right? Because that's what we're talking about today. That's considering everything you guys have just said. You've talked about the books. You've talked about the satanic involvement with certain people in Hollywood and in music. Considering all of this, right? And these are in books. You have it. You said there's a bibliography this thick. How come more people aren't getting arrested? How come more people aren't going to jail? How come more evidence is coming out? Is it being covered up, or what's going on? Like, why didn't more people know?
David, when was the last time we had high level accountability for anything in this country? Because we've seen some Holly weirdos go down, and then we saw the Epstein arrest, which is arguably the most high profile arrest of all time due to his connections. And he suicided himself twice. And Cash Patel and Dan Bongino are telling you that in a place where they kept El Chapo, a guy that had actually been broken out of a prison, and they hadn't had a suicide for 13 years. Now, the last time we had any type of high-level prosecution on any level was Iran-Contra during the 80s. And by the way, I'm going to tell you this. Epstein was an arms dealer. That's the big secret nobody wants to tell you. That's the big trafficking. That's the billions of dollars. In fact, it's a known fact. Prince Andrew is the UK's arms dealer. He was cutting those deals. Epstein also, remember when they went into his safe and he had that false passport with a Saudi Arabian address and identity? Okay. A lot of people don't realize that during Iran-Contra, because again, it was slaps on the wrist and they made Oliver North the face of it. The weapons were being bought by Israel from Czechoslovakia and other Eastern European nations, and then went down. Mark Rich was heavily involved in that. Okay. And then they'd get the weapons and ship up the drugs, and then we pay it on the back end. So it was an international intelligence operation. So now we have to go back to the early. Yeah, we have to go back to the early 90s, brother. We're in 2025. Since we put anybody behind bars, there's one exception, and it was very low level. And, you mentioned 9/11 and these things. Well, Dick Cheney had a thing called Enron, and he also had a guy named Scooter Libby. Scooter Libby kind of took the brunt of that, but Trump pardoned him in his first administration. So you show me another person on a high level that's even been tried of any of these crimes.
So what you're suggesting is the fact that this evidence is out there, and then Liz, I'll throw it back over to you. The fact that this evidence is out there, it's in these books, and all the things that Diddy's been accused of, even though not convicted of. You're suggesting that these people will never be held accountable to the highest. Now, Liz, let me ask you: do you think? And look, regardless of the origins and whether or not
Mhm.
they're devil cults or whatever they might be, do you think what happened here? And I'm not minimizing your
No, I know.
hypothesis
It's
on
it's
that.
funny though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, remember, there's an audience watching, going, "What are these people talking about?" So I'm trying to
Well,
ask the
wait,
questions that they'd be
let me
willing.
just stop you right
Yeah,
there. Like when you say this sounds crazy, you're right. It
yeah.
does sound crazy and it is crazy. But that doesn't mean it's not true. And before I started researching this stuff and learned by examining evidence in all these cases that this stuff is real and it does happen, I didn't think it was real either. I thought it was crazy then. I still think it's crazy, but just because it sounds crazy and nuts and, stranger than fiction doesn't mean it's not true and real.
So let me ask you this then, going to the high level accountability,
Mhm.
right? We saw a very public, several attempts to put Donald Trump in jail. We saw the convictions in New York City with Alvin Bragg. He's probably the highest of high that you can convict of something. And what he was convicted on was probably, in my opinion, one of the worst put together things that we'll never know how bad it was, because they basically abandoned it. And so there's no sense in appealing it because he'll never be sentenced on it. We'll never find out how really poor that prosecution was and how weak that evidence was. Now, take Diddy, for example. I've reviewed the testimony. I've seen the witness testimony. I've heard
Mhm.
the allegations. If you were just some guy off the street that was accused of this, not only would you have a conviction for trafficking, you'd be going to jail for the rest of your life. But now Diddy is walking away possibly in 6 years, as Megan was saying before she left. Well, the question then becomes: were the prosecutors in on it? Did they overcharge him? Did they not bring the case? How do you not hold somebody accountable with evidence this good,
Mhm.
but yet somebody like Donald Trump can get convicted with evidence that bad? I'm trying to square that nexus.
Well, I can't get into the heads or minds of the jurors or the lawyers or the judge.
They were
We do
probably
know,
bored. That we can go into their
yeah,
mind there. Yes.
I think they're probably really happy to leave today.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
have peace. Um, and the testimony was horrific. But
Right.
we do know that in the past that he has been able to pay people off not to just get off on criminal charges. He's done it to buy videotapes. For example, the videotape of him beating the crap out of Cassie.
Yeah, that was
Paying
horrible.
off people, law enforcement, hotel workers, like you name it. Most people have a price, sadly, to do the wrong thing. With that being said, if there was some huge big cover up, I don't think he would have been found guilty in any charges. So, as much as that has been sadly the norm for these people in the past to get away with everything because they have so much money and power, that's changing. And if it wasn't changing, he never would have been arrested in the first place. Jeffrey Epstein never would have been arrested. Ghislaine Maxwell never would have been arrested. Jean-Luc Brunel, Mike Jeffries, Nexium, Backpage shut down, right? So I can see like the bigger picture here of what's going on. Now, you mentioned earlier, when are we going to see more arrests? Of course, in Diddy's ring and or Epstein's ring, there have to be co-conspirators, there have to be clients, and we haven't seen justice for any of those people yet, right? But with that being said, there are hundreds and hundreds of arrests happening. When you have a ring like Jeffrey Epstein's and or Diddy's, who do you think does the dirty work? It is the members of the cartels. The members of the cartels do the dirty work for people like Diddy, Epstein, and other elites. Many of them are illegals. Well, guess what? President Trump's DOJ has been arresting them en masse, arresting hundreds of them, many of them who are convicted pedophiles and or sex traffickers. And I will add to go back to what we were talking about earlier, many of these cartel members also worship Satan. They have the satanic tattoos all over themselves. And I don't know if you caught Kristi Noem's press conference with President Trump the other day, but she said that they, rounded up one guy who's a cannibal and he was eating himself on the airplane. And they had to remove him and send him to the hospital. This is what she said. This is not what I'm saying. This is what she said. These people are involved in really sick and twisted stuff. This stuff has been going on for years. You have people in Haiti, they engage in voodoo. You have, members of the Hispanic community sometimes engage in Santeria. Like you go, you look at places like Mexico that have, you know, the Mayan temples, and like they used to sacrifice people there. This has been going on for hundreds of years. So, but at the end of the day, I do believe all this stuff is coming to surface. I do believe that we will see more people who were involved with Diddy, perhaps like Jay-Z, get arrested. And I do also really strongly believe that this is not the end for Diddy. I think we'll see more charges against him. We've already seen more lawsuits filed against him this week. And before this week, there was already over 70. And some of those lawsuits probably will have their own trials as well if they don't settle out of court. So, you know, I think that this party is just getting started, honestly.
So let me ask you, and I'll throw it over to you, James, or Jason, sorry. See, I didn't use your initials, and now I don't know your name. So, so even though it's right in front of me. So look, the public is seeing this, right? The more access to information we have is people are becoming more aware. They can get these books now. And I think the more alternative media, like places like X, where you can actually get information that's not censored through giant corporations that tells you what you can and can't know, I think people are learning more things. That being said, you know, and I agree with you, Liz, you know, there is some accountability now. But when people see this, what do you think the evolution of this is going to be? Do you think the awareness will lead to more accountability? Or will the awareness just make people almost immune to it? Will it become just a matter of fact that this is just the way it is? This is how it happens. Will they normalize it? Because what I've noticed is a lot of the things that we find morally reprehensible, as soon as they're exposed, they become normalized and accepted. And you can look throughout the last couple of decades and all the things I'm mentioning and things that are like, oh my God, people are doing this. And now it becomes, yeah, but it's okay. Do you think this will just become a well-known part and parcel of an industry that's just disgusting, and you can choose or choose not to be involved in it? But look, you have people that people view as being celebrities and thrilled with nonetheless. How many people have been accused or even convicted or in civil cases of doing some horrible things, but because they're celebrities and people look up to them and idolize them, they don't care. So are we getting to a place where it doesn't matter if you're a big enough star? It's almost like a business being too big to fail. Are celebrities too big to be held accountable, and will this ever end?
No. Wait, sorry, can I just go, because I have to leave for another appointment in a minute. Yeah. But no, they won't. And here's why. The full truth on what these elites do to children has not come out. You know, with Epstein, all these documentaries that came out on Epstein, like they talked about what he did to girls that were either adults or barely legal adults. None of these documentaries talked about his involvement in crimes against children, like young children. And it goes beyond, sadly, the sexual abuse and the sex trafficking. When the full truth comes out, what some of these elites do to children, any person with a soul and a conscience who's not a psychopath like these child predators will be up in arms about it. The problem is most people don't know it's real because the media has aggressively worked to cover this stuff up. But as soon as the full truth comes out about sex crimes against children, it's over. The public will rise up, they will demand justice, and we will start seeing more and more people held accountable. So I got to run. I'm so sorry, but I have to get to another appointment. But thank you so much for having me on.
It's not going to be as fun as this. It will not be as fun as this, but I know you're going to do great over there too. Thank you, Liz, for joining.
Awesome. Well, I would love to come back soon. You guys have a great night. Happy 4th. Happy Independence Day. Bye.
I know. Happy 4th. Take care. All right, Jason, throwing it back to you. Look, it's a one-on-one exclusive now. Let me get your take on it. So, you know, you heard what I said. It's like, basically, are we normalizing the depravity? Is this what's going to be, where are we going now? Or do you think people will finally be held accountable?
I would say this. I think the depravity was already normalized, brother. I think that, you know, if I can agree with a couple things that Liz said, not necessarily everything. I think that the only reason that a guy like Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell gets arrested in the first place is there's just so much public outcry for it. And to Trump's credit, and I'm no, you know, MAGA guy, I'm no right or left guy. He really did help lionize the Epstein thing when he brought it up initially with Sean Hannity and said that, you know, Bill Clinton might have some problems because of his associations with Epstein, kind of almost pre-absolving himself of his relationship. And that showed confidence in his relationship that there was nothing nefarious. You know, we mentioned Kevin Spacey earlier. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, Bill Clinton was on that plane, at least to the Africa trip, with Kevin Spacey. Those guys were friends going back to the 90s. In fact, if you watch House of Cards, Kevin Spacey talked about in interviews how he modeled a lot of that character after Clinton. And Clinton, when asked about that show, said it was a lot closer to reality than people think. If you haven't seen House of Cards, folks, that should give you also an insight, not just to the Holly weirdos, but how Washington, D.C. also
actually works.
operates.
Actually works, by the way. Actually works. Like, watch House of Cards. It's real, but go ahead.
I mean, again, that should scare people, right? Initially. And, she mentioned some other high-level trafficking, and you were kind of asking whether or not anybody would have their comeuppance. Well, Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison right now. I believe Jeffrey Epstein to be very, very dead, although there are other people out there that will say otherwise. She mentioned another one. And you know what? If we're going to go outside of the realm of politics accountability, once you get to a certain level, they will burn you. And I'll explain this. She mentioned the NXIVM cult. Are you aware of that?
Mm-mm.
So NXIVM was this thing. It was outside of Albany, New York. And, the individual's name is totally, I can't remember right now. And it's crazy because I've covered that for so long. But he did get convicted and he is in prison. However, he was bankrolled by the Bronfman sisters, who were billionaires. And not only bankrolled by them, but essentially one of the sisters jumped the country. And one of the sisters stayed in the country, got convicted on a lower level. I think it was something like 8, maybe 14 years max. She's probably set to get out pretty soon, but she bankrolled everybody that was charged. Now, what was really alarming about this is not only did you have underage girls in the States, but they had something called the Rainbow Cultural Garden in Europe and other parts of, I believe, South America, where they were taking these individual girls that spoke multiple languages, and they were like 14 and 16, and putting them as teachers to these toddlers. It also involved the former president of Mexico's son on a high level in Mexico. In fact, in that case, I believe it was one of his relatives that was one of the underage girls that was trafficked. Those people were never charged with anything. Okay. So they'll cut you off at some point if you're too liable to too many people. Another person she mentioned, Jean-Luc Brunel. For those not aware, Jean-Luc Brunel is almost a mini Les Wexner in the sense that he's involved in the fashion industry and modeling. And a lot of these high-level people that are involved in more are in that. And they get their hooks into these girls when they're teenagers. Well, Brunel was arrested. And while he was in Spain, he died in prison, supposedly committed suicide. And who knows, he might have. I can't imagine what the conditions were like in that prison while he was awaiting sex trafficking charges. You can see, pictures of Brunel with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell while she's rubbing his feet. Very disturbing pictures. I don't necessarily recommend you check them out, but they're there. I hope that we can get to a place where we can get true accountability. But I've got to be honest with you, David. In a world where spycraft is often sexcraft and blackmail has been utilized for many, many years, I don't know if that's possible. For instance, David, if you go back to another operation where people were being filmed having sex, and Diddy was doing that, I don't think there's any argument there. That was actually a part of MK Ultra. And people go, what? Oh, I thought that was the LSD thing. Well, no, it was the LSD thing, but they were testing a bunch of other drugs. And on the coastlines in New York and California, they were running brothels under Operation Midnight Climax. Okay. Now, again, if you think back in the 60s and 70s that all the girls were 18 and on the up and up, and they weren't just recruiting, the prostitutes that were around at the time that were drug addicts, etc., you don't know how this works. So the same thing, with the Epstein crowd, when you see the young girls and how that whole thing worked, he was using girls to recruit girls, and some would actually come up in that network. When people say, I want the client list, there is no client list. That's imagination land. People were not coming in to buy women from Epstein. He was using them to negotiate deals. For instance, like I said, with Prince Andrew, you had a lot of arms deals that would go there. You want to curry favor. He was using them to blackmail other individuals. You look at former Governor Ben Richardson, not Ben Richardson. Man, it's killing me. I can't remember his name. What's his name? Well, Governor Richardson no longer there, but he was named in a bunch of these suits from these girls. A lot of people don't realize the New Mexico ranch, Zorro Ranch, was never formally investigated, and none of the charges stemmed from there. This is where he was accused of, and again, I know this is going to sound crazy, of a baby farm where he wanted an army of Epsteins cloned, basically. Like he wanted to inseminate Epsteins throughout. That's New York Times. And they never investigated this place. Had a helicopter pad, was in the middle of the desert. And by the way, the age of consent there, I believe it was either 15 or 16. One of the ways that Epstein avoided any of these charges of trafficking is he usually take his victims within the state. And when he would abuse victims in some states, they would be of legal age at 15 or 16. He was never charged formally as a sex offender, for instance, in New Mexico for what he was convicted of in Miami. So, people with wealth work the system. We just talked about that baseball player. He's far from the only one. Until the system changes, and by the way, I don't necessarily think that that's just because of Hollywood or politicians. If you look at the overall power structure, what's even before that, you look at religion, right? And you can go through religious abuse of children to the times of Rome, can you not? Where you would literally take a young boy as a concubine and nothing was done. And you look at the modern church and the Vatican and even the popes like Ratzinger that helped move a lot of these people along, whether you believe accusations against them personally or not. So, we have a problem on that end, but let me talk about another problem really quickly. We also, lionize a lot of these people. You talk about how, they get a civil suit, nothing's done. It's worse than that. Conor McGregor was at President Trump's inauguration and is going on Tucker Carlson ready to run for the presidency. I documented that case all the way in the beginning of 2019. It occurred in December of 2018 and was highly covered up. I never got so much hate on my limited reach anyway. I had the troll bots were out there at the time because it didn't break in the States until March. Literally took almost 4 months where they named him. They were going in the European press as Irish sports star. And I had people saying, oh, it's Rory McIlroy. By the way, 6 months after that incident, he was accused of another incident. We're talking about multiple on top of multiple. Another thing, I know we love influencer culture. I would encourage people to really look at what the Tate brothers did to make their money. And I know that there's that infamous video of him with the blonde and the belt. And, she's come out and said, no, we were role playing. I'm going to let people in a little secret. Whether they were role playing or not, that girl is 14 years old, 15 max, maybe in that video. What else do you need to know? Like, I'm not a hypocrite. Okay. So if I'm going to be covering, things like this, and I want you to take me seriously because I know how this sounded. And, I try to ease people into things like ritualistic abuse. I don't necessarily know if that's what Diddy was doing, but I think blackmail is extremely obvious. Again, getting back to the Cuba Gooding thing, I think sexual pressure to do these type of things is very obvious. Going back to Hollywood abuse, read the Judy Garland story. Somewhere over the rainbow, indeed. That shows you that, in these power structures, it's generational. Even in the government's highest levels in the United Kingdom, forget about Andrew. The allegations about David Heath are over the top. And by the way, I think some of this stuff gets in there to muddy the waters. For instance, you mentioned quote unquote Pizzagate earlier, right? I like to refer to it as Pedogate because the one piece of evidence I really want to bring people to. And I remember when this happened, because the New York Times had contacted me. They basically wanted me for a hit piece on Alex Jones and do an interview about InfoWars. And I said, I'd be happy to if you would publish this email in regards to the Pedogate scandal that WikiLeaks published. And it was the one where John Podesta is on a group email where 3 children are named, okay? and their ages are named. The oldest one, 11. And they're being talked about being Ubered to the farm for entertainment, and that they will be in a hot tub for sure. Now, I don't have kids, but I help take care of my nieces, and I have common sense. I don't send children by themselves that are 11 years old and younger for entertainment to be sure that they're in a hot tub with adults. I mean, that's about as disturbing as it gets, and nothing was done there either.
Yeah, Jason, I think, and this is something that I'm optimistic that the aftermath of this trial will at least spur additional conversations about this, and folks like you can draw more attention to the things that are going on out there, and then maybe accountability can come. That's why I'm grateful for this platform to give people voices where ordinarily we didn't have a voice before. So, but I got to run. We're out of time today, but Jason, I really appreciate all of your takes today, all your insights today. It's been an exciting conversation. We're going to look towards September for the sentencing. We'll see what happens, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this and so many other things until then. But with that, that's all the time we have for today. I appreciate you so much.